Hey there. If you're an entrepreneur or a first-time founder, I want you to know that I really get what it's like to do that and how incredibly overwhelming that can feel at times. And I know that not just because I coach first-time founders, but I myself have been there. In my very first business, I had to work 7-day weeks, sometimes 80, 90-hour weeks just to keep the lights on, and I sacrificed really important things in my life to make that business work. I left family vacations by myself to come back home to save that business time and time again. And likewise, when I went on to run multi-million-dollar companies for others, my pattern was the same. I could make something successful, but I did it by grinding away, working harder than anyone else, and ultimately sacrificing really important parts of my life that I now regret. So along that journey, I discovered coaching, and I had the chance to get coached by some of the world's best mentors, and I discovered a way to generate success while keeping my life in balance and not sacrificing.
If you're an entrepreneur who classifies yourself as a workaholic because that you believe that your business needs you to be a perfectionist, this conversation and podcast is directly intended to serve all of you. Let me ask you a question. Are you starting a business and believe that every stone must be unearthed by you in order for your business to be cultivated to its fullest potential? If you answered yes, that's okay. I'll provide some expert assistance and analysis on how to live a more balanced existence in just a moment. But first, I want you to know that you're not alone. According to my friends over at Adobe, they report that while many entrepreneurs report having better work-life balance if they run their own companies rather than going the traditional employment route, Adobe still reports nearly half of American entrepreneurs still struggle to disconnect from their business and achieve better balance. And over 82% say that they've lost sleep because of work concerns due to the quality and viability of their business. For my friend Andrew Poles, as you saw in his succinct introduction to this conversation, he was once in the same boat as all of you, working 70 to 80 hours a week, making sure that the first of his 3 businesses got off the ground without a hitch, sacrificing time with his family and those things that he found joy in doing. Fast forward to present day, Poles is now a seasoned executive coach with over 20 years of experience in both business and executive coaching, helping founders and entrepreneurs navigate the toughest challenges associated with building and scaling their businesses. Poles has coached over 10,000 leaders in his career and worked with executives from companies such as Netflix, Epic Games, NASA, and Dell, just to name a few. He specializes in helping early-stage founders and entrepreneurs through their overwhelm and bottlenecks, which are stunting the growth of their business, helping them to build high-performing teams, lead with confidence, and avoid burnout. And Poles joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, Andrew, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to learn about your life and business and everything in between, my friend. It's
Me too.
great to see you, my friend, and happy Tuesday to you.
Happy Tuesday to you, Kevin. It's great to be with you today.
Absolutely. So, Andrew, I wanted to start our conversation by asking you to define what it means to you to experience business prosperity. What does the term business prosperity mean to you, my friend?
Well, it has a couple of components for me. First off, I wouldn't consider myself prosperous if I weren't doing something that was deeply meaningful to me personally as a human being and as a leader. So for me, that's about the kind of impact what I'm doing has for people. So that's number one. For me, if I had a business that wasn't doing that, I don't know that I would feel like I was prospering. And then number two, I think that for me to be prospering, I have to feel like the customers or clients of my business are really thriving or winning as a function of engaging with my product or my service. And that's got to be the way that I'm growing the financial wealth, that I get in exchange. I've had, engagements and business, opportunities where I didn't feel like my clients were doing as well as I wanted them to. And even though financially it might have been lucrative, I didn't feel good about it. I wouldn't feel like I was prospering. So I think it has to have those three components. It has to be meaningful. Clients have to be really benefiting. And then also financially, it has to be helping me grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Andrew, I know that you spend your days now as a seasoned executive coach, and I know that you have over 20 years of experience helping founders and entrepreneurs navigate the toughest challenges of their business when it comes to building and scaling a business, my friend. So I'm curious, what's the greatest lesson you think you've learned about building and scaling businesses, and the greatest lesson that you've learned about sustainability in business over your years of experience, my friend?
Well, I think if you look at it from the perspective of the leaders of the businesses have this interesting pattern where there's like this dual arc of development where the business has its own arc of development and the executive or the executives have their arc of personal and professional development. And I think one of the most fascinating things is tracking how those two arcs move together. So if you have a founder or you have an executive who gets stuck in life or stuck in their professional growth, what you almost always find is that the business also gets stuck. And so, what I think is most interesting about your question is how do you help the people who are leading develop personally and professionally and use that as a lever in helping the business also grow and develop and succeed?
Yeah, and I know that you've coached over 10,000 business owners and business executives in the field of both leadership and development, my friend. And I know that you've worked with companies and executives from companies like NASA, Dell, Netflix, and Epic Games, my friend. And you founded three businesses of your own. So based on your experience, my friend, I'm curious to ask you about what it means to have ambition in business. Or what's the best lesson you think you've learned about leadership and different leadership styles, considering the amount of people that you've had a chance to work with and for, my friend?
I think a couple of key takeaways there are number one, especially for people who are doing this for the first time, so your first time founders or your first time entrepreneurs, those people are up against a lot of challenges and gaps in their skill set for what's needed from them to grow a business relative to what they've experienced before they start their first business. And it can be really tempting when you don't know how to do something from your own experience to want to emulate someone else who you respect and who's been successful. And I think one of the challenges of that, Kevin, is that when people feel threatened or worried that they don't know how to do something or they don't have experience and they're trying to protect that sense of needing to be in charge and having people's trust by seeming like they know more than they do, by emulating someone else, that lack of authenticity will often bite them in the butt. So I think one of the most important things you can do as a leader is to learn how to be yourself no matter what the situation is, whether you know what to do or you don't know what to do, or you're experimenting, or you're even emulating someone else. The important thing is to find a way to be yourself in whatever you're doing. And why that's important is because people can tell the difference. And to be successful in business, you need a team who's behind the vision you're trying to fulfill and who's behind you as their leader. And people will they will gather around, support, and empower, follow someone who they feel is real and authentic. And they generally won't around someone they feel is inauthentic. So the first lesson is I think you have to find a way to be yourself in all circumstances. How about that as a starting point?
Absolutely, my friend. And I know that the beginning of your business journey wasn't all beds and roses and butterflies, my friend. And I know that you started your first business when you were 23 as a single dad, and you were driven by one goal, my friend, to build sort of a company where you could bring your daughter to work and achieve balance in that way. But you worked, as you mentioned, 7 days a week when you first started out, putting in 70 to 80 hours a week, making a significant sacrifices when it came to time and your own family and physical health, my friend. So, when we talk about achieving balance, that's sort of a buzzword in business, achieving balance. But I'm wondering, well, if you could go back to your 23-year-old self and relive that experience, what sort of lessons would you teach your 23-year-old self about business that you know now that you didn't know back then?
Well, if I answer your question from the perspective of balance, I think one of the things I would share with my younger self that I wound up having regrets about was, especially for parents, but not exclusively for parents, is that life has its seasons. But unlike the seasons of the year that recur every year, the seasons of life don't recur. So, when you're raising a child, every stage of their development is a unique season in life. And if you miss it, it doesn't ever come back around. And so I think one of the things that I would tell myself is you have to find ways of showing up and being present for life when it's happening. And I had a tendency, not just when I was 23, but for many years, to be so obsessive about the things I was doing and the projects I was working on that it was all consuming and I missed a lot of important seasons of life. So one lesson I would teach myself is don't sacrifice, don't throw out the champagne with the cork. It's great to work hard. It's great to really be ambitious, but don't sacrifice the moments of life that only come around once for your ambition. That's number one.
Well, I tell you, that's great advice, my friend. And to that point, it leads into my next question, Andrew. I'm curious to ask you about effective delegation in business, and what do you think it means to effectively delegate in business?
Well, I think I'm really a fan of the model that gets put forward in the book called The Big Leap about where business leaders should be spending their time. And in that book, he talks about the four quadrants of competency and excellence. And one of them he calls the zone of genius. So the zone of genius are those things, Kevin, that you and I do, that we do so well, and they're so natural for us, but they are unique in other people's experience. There are things that we do that no one else does the way we do them. And those are the places where, as leaders, we can provide unique value and unique leverage for our businesses, while at the same time doing something we truly love to do and enjoy. And I think where most of us get caught up is we spend time in areas where we're super competent. Maybe we're even excellent at things, but they're not our zone of genius. There are things that other people could do as well as we do or better. And so those are the places where I think delegation is very powerful. You get a lot of leverage for it. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say about this is that the mistake I see most leaders make when they're new, when they delegate, is that they're using the word delegate when what they're really doing is dumping. They're just dumping something off of their plate onto someone else's plate without the appropriate amount of concern or regard or time and attention that's needed to move that effectively from their plate to someone else's plate so that the person who takes it over is set up to do it really well and to be successful with it. And that usually takes more time and attention than people want it to. And so as a result, they wind up with breakdowns and they wind up resenting the person they gave it to, and they wind up being right that they're the only person who can do it, when in fact they just don't understand how to delegate effectively. And then they get stuck doing things they really shouldn't be doing. So I think those are the top two lessons I've learned about this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrew, what do you think it means to lead with empathy in business? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, how I look at this, Kevin, is that this is one of the core tenets of my coaching practice, and it's a core tenet of my life, because I've learned that people and the way that people act is fundamentally connected to the way that they view and experience the world. And everyone's view and experience of the world is unique to them. And people can't act in any other way than the ways in which are available to them as a function of how they experience life. So if you don't get that fundamental idea, then you just have these unrealistic expectations that people can act in whatever way that makes sense to you. But that's not true. People can't do that. They can only act in ways that make sense from their view and experience. So if you don't understand how someone else views and experiences the world, well, then you have no idea how to have conversations with them that move the needle. You don't know. It's like you want to go on this trip and you want to go to Paris. Great. We know where Paris is. Paris is awesome. But you don't know if where you're starting out from is New York or Melbourne. And it's a very different trajectory for the plane. So I think it's critical to have empathy in business so that you can understand where everyone you're working with is starting from, so you can lead them effectively to the destination.
Yeah, and I know for you, Andrew, you work with businesses who are in their early stages as sort of founders and small business owners, and you help them cut through their overwhelm to build high-performing teams and lead with confidence without feeling burned out, my friend. So what's the key to doing that successfully in your view, my friend?
I mean, there are multiple things people need to do that, but I'm just going to highlight three that I think people can really make sense of and maybe even put to use. And the first is, there's this great quote from the book The Art of War, that victorious warriors figure out how to win and then go to battle, and defeated warriors go to battle and then figure out how to win. And the point of that quote, I think, from Lao Tzu is that if you don't have a plan and you don't have a strategy and you haven't figured out how you're going to accomplish what you're doing and you just jump right into the fray, you've already lost the battle. So I think the first thing leaders need to have a really successful business and not be overwhelmed and burned out is you need a soup to nuts, a beginning to end plan that connects the bigger vision that you're going to rally people behind all the way down to the most minuscule tactic of how you're going to operate some part of your business. And when you have that kind of a plan and you have ways of measuring progress and success, it helps you organize your resources in a more effective way instead of pursuing everything at the same time with insufficient resources for that kind of a play. So that's number one. Number two is, especially for founders and entrepreneurs, you must have a system for managing the massive amount of sort of promises, projects, details that you need to get done day over day that doesn't rely one bit on your memory. You have to take everything you have to do out of memory and put it into a system, a structure that manages it for you, that includes your calendar and reminders and things of that nature. Because otherwise, you burn up too much mental energy trying to remember everything you need to do and all the promises that you've made. And that's just really ineffective and also leads to burnout. So that's number two. And then number three is, you've got to understand and master the skill of influence. You'll never make it as a leader, as a founder, as an entrepreneur, if you don't understand how to influence people and outcomes, because pretty much most of your job is about influence. You have to influence people to join your team when you recruit. You have to influence customers to buy. You have to influence investors to put in money. Once you've got your team in place, you have to influence them around the strategy that you want to see executed. So if you're ineffective with influence, then once again, you'll just burn up a bunch of energy being ineffective, and then you'll burn out. So the top three things people need to master to avoid burnout are that kind of visionary planning, a structure that manages everything you need to do in your work and your day outside of work. And then number three, the skill of influence. And if you get those three things in place, that mops up about 80% of what it takes to be effective and not burn out.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrew, I also want to ask you about carrying the weight of the world as a business owner. When you first start out, a lot of people struggle with sort of relinquishing themselves when they first start a business about accomplishing every task that a business needs to grow. And I know that you have some thoughts on business clarity and leading with resilience. So what do you think people need to know about business clarity and resilience, my friend?
Yeah, I think if I could, make it simple, I'd say two things really help here. Number one, people need to develop the awareness, the self-awareness to notice the extent to which they take events in life, circumstances in their business, things that are factual, like how much cash runway they have, how many customers they have, what's their churn rate. Those are all facts. They need to be self-aware enough to realize the extent to which they turn facts and things that are happening in the business into dramas or narratives that they're telling themselves about themselves that disempower them. One of my clients, for example, I often catch saying, "Oh, if I had been a better CEO, it would have taken this much time instead of this much time to accomplish this thing." So they take things that happen in the world and they turn them into some kind of a story they tell themselves about themselves that disempowers them. And that is really ineffective, and it makes absolutely no difference, and it doesn't get you down to the nuts and bolts, the actual mechanics of how your business works. So one thing you need to develop in terms of getting the weight of the world off your shoulders is the ability to see life and see business the way it's happening and not through the lens of your disempowering self defeating narratives and stories. That's number one. I think number two is you've got to realize that business is a game of wins and losses. It's not a game of wins. Nobody ever built anything meaningful where they won every single customer, every contract. They never made a bad hire. They never got into financial squeezes. That just doesn't happen. And so you have to realize that some of the losses that you have, the failures or the unmet expectations or goals, that is part of the ride. It's not evidence that it's not evidence that you suck. It's not evidence that your business sucks. It's just part of the deal. And so you have to learn to love that climb where part of the game is sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and how you deal with it when you lose, that's what makes the difference. It's not about winning every time out.
Well, I have to tell you, as a professional speaker, I tell you, I win and get rejected on an everyday basis, my friend. So it's all about balance, isn't it?
Yes, sir. That's right.
Yeah, and Andrew, before I ask you my next question, I want to tell you a story. But I used to be the lead job developer at the YMCA in my hometown, and for better or for worse, my desk was directly next to my boss's. And every day, the workday started at 8:30 and it ended at 4 o'clock. And I am a recovering sort of perfectionist, and what I mean by that is when an email came into my inbox, I felt an urge to respond to it right away. And my boss had sent me an email at, I don't know, 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and I responded within a half an hour of getting the email. And she said, unless it's a dire emergency, life happens for me outside of the office at 4:30, and you really have to develop better habits on just because something is in your inbox doesn't mean you have to respond to it right away. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on the importance of business professionalism, but also the importance of really striking the balance of your mental sort of health and sort of your own productivity when it comes to your own health. How do you think we can strike the appropriate balance, my friend?
This is for me 100% a function of, well, 99% a function of leadership. I think leadership, like your example, so demonstrated so well, is critical in helping people understand what the expectations are. And I think one of the challenges, Kevin, is that especially in Silicon Valley style startups where you have either angel investors or institutional investors who are putting money into your company to help you grow it, they have expectations for a certain return on their investment. And if you don't satisfy those expectations, it becomes harder and harder, if not impossible, to raise further money as you're ready to grow more. And so that tends to create a grind work culture because every missed opportunity could for all anyone knows, and this is the thinking, make or break the next round of funding or the whatever the next big milestone is. And so if the leadership of a company has a mindset where, unlike your boss, the mindset is, look, we're going to grind away at this for 5 years or 7 years, and then you'll have a big exit if we're successful and you'll make all this money and it will all have been worth it. It's going to be very, very hard for an employee of that company to draw boundaries around their time outside of, quote, normal work hours when the leadership of that company doesn't see that as valuable. So leadership in this regard is really, really important. And I think we have all these stories about companies like Tesla and other stories where people are grinding away and they're producing these incredible products and they're changing the market or they're changing the world and they worked like crazy hours all the time. So, it happens and people have these great outcomes and maybe they say the sacrifice is worth it. So, you have to kind of keep it in the balance. So speaking for myself, what I find is that life is a game that's lived over the long haul. And if you live your life for some future reward and sacrifice what matters now, it doesn't always pan out and you can't get the time back. And sometimes you can't get your health back. So I tend to lean more towards guiding leaders to find that balance. And it is challenging. It is challenging to do when the demands and expectations are high, but it's worth fighting for. And I think, if you, so what's the solution I find? The solution I find is clearly define what are the KPIs, what are the goals, what are the objectives you want to hit in some window of time. And as these demands come at you, look at them from the point of view of, hey, if I do this tomorrow instead of today, is it going to make any difference in us keeping our promise or on hitting this objective? And if the answer is no, do it tomorrow.
Yeah, as you were talking, Andrew, I've got a staff of people that work for me, and they always tell me when I edit podcasts that the podcast will be there when you get to it anyway. So
Yeah.
take some time to really reprioritize and center yourself. That's important, isn't it?
I think it's critically important. It's critically important because, the other thing too is that you can do things to your body now that you can absorb now, but they can bite you in the butt later too. And then there's the whole point of missing moments of life for no worthwhile result in the in the outcome. So I do think it's a challenge, and I'm with you, Kevin. There are some things you're not going to get everything done today. You're just not. Today you're going to get done what you're going to get done. So every day you have to answer the question, what are the critical things that really do need to get done today and what can go to tomorrow? And then do the ones that you're going to get done today to the best of your ability and then move on and go do other things that are meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrew, we share a kinship in the idea that, talent and drive isn't enough to grow small businesses. And, I always say that, because I talk to business owners about the importance of hiring folks with disabilities, which I'll ask you about in a second. But you always say that talent and drive isn't enough, as I said, and growing businesses, especially small businesses, in your view, my friend, requires a completely different skill set and strategy than starting one, my friend. So, what's the difference between starting and growing a business, and why do you believe talent and drive isn't enough? Tell me more, my friend.
Well, so I'll share a story with you as a way of illustrating it. My first business that you brought up, which I started back in 1997, was a retail furniture business, and we built solid wood custom furniture for people, case goods and such. And I started that business at a graduate school, as you said, so I could have some place to take my daughter to work. And that was my trade in graduate school to pay my bills. I was in school for philosophy, and I did that on the weekends for extra money. So I knew how to build that furniture. I knew how to sell it when someone walked into the store. I had a lot of talent with that. And so, based on that and understanding the business model, I was able to raise enough money to put together an inventory and rent a space and set up shop and hang my shingle. So the talent that I had in the industry was enough to get me a shingle hung and an inventory built. But then it seems like, oh, well, now we need to market. We need to let people know we're here. Well, I'd never done marketing before. And maybe I have talent around communication, but if I don't know how to market, I need to learn that skill. And next thing you know, I need to hire people to either work in the manufacturing side or to work on the sales side. And well, okay, I've never hired anyone before. Well, how do you do that? And then I've got people to manage. Well, I haven't managed people before. How do you do that? So the talent that I have is not enough for me to do all the things that it takes to grow my business beyond opening its doors and getting our first customer. So that means that you have to effectively grow a business when it's your very first time. There's just so much you have to learn, and it really makes a difference to have mentors, guides. Like in my first business, I had a cousin who was a very successful businessman who was my mentor. I would call him at least once a month, if not more, to ask him questions about how do I do this and how do I do that. And so, you can start a business based on talent, but you can't grow it based on talent. You have to grow it based on real skill and real business acumen. And that's something you can build.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I mentioned to you at the outset of our conversation, Andrew, I was born with cerebral palsy. And at the age of 9, buddy, I was told I'd never walk again without the assistance of a walker for the rest of my life. And when I graduated college, Andrew, I spent 6.5 years without employment because when I went on job interviews with news directors 10 consecutive times, my friend, I was told that I was good enough, but no one would hire me because they viewed my disability as a liability. So I have made my message of employment exclusion into a career as a public speaker, and I now talk to businesses about the importance of hiring folks with disabilities and the competitive advantage that can bring to an organizational culture. So I'm curious to get your thoughts based on your experience and expertise, both from a personal and professional standpoint, about the positive benefits that come with hiring and infusing individuals with disabilities into an organizational culture, because I truly believe that talent, my friend, is an equally distributable commodity, but sometimes access to opportunity isn't, my friend. So how do you think we can incorporate more folks with disabilities into the workforce? What are your thoughts there?
Well, to the first question I think you asked, which was, what benefits do I think it brings to a work culture to hire people with who are differently able? One of the things I think it brings to the culture is a certain level of inspiration that you don't really see any other way. And why I say that is because, and your story is such a great example of this, Kevin. It's just so inspiring. People who have disabilities like yours have an additional challenge over and above the ones that all human beings face to just be a good and successful human being. And that's hard to do. It is hard to be a really great human and be successful in this world. And so to do that while simultaneously dealing with a disability just makes you a hero, I think, in most people's books. And it brings a level of real respect and inspiration to the culture. And I think people want to work hard when there's someone like that in their organization because it takes away a lot of excuses. And so I think that can be a huge benefit to inspiration and a work ethic, but also empathy. People can really empathize with, like, I'm doing what I'm doing, but Kevin's doing what he's doing. And in addition to that, he's dealing with all of these other things. So I also think it brings a spirit of empathy. I think the second thing is people with disabilities often and almost always bring a unique perspective on life, on work, on the market, on the customer base. And so I think they have something to add there. And in terms of how they can be better incorporated, I by no means claim to be an expert about this. So I'm going to just tell you my opinion. I'm going to qualify this by saying this is my opinion. But I think what would really work is, for people to interview people with disabilities in such a way that when they do apply for the job, that they're making themselves aware that we all have unconscious, thoughtless biases about people who we perceive as, quote, different. And if you don't confront that and tell yourself the truth about that, you're likely going to discriminate against people that you view as different in a way that's not great for them and it's not great for your organization. So I think one of the things that needs to happen is education. People need to understand, that they have these biases and that it's a part of being human and it's not bad, but you have to be responsible for them. So when you're looking at someone as a potential candidate, you can see them and their ability and not their disability as part of your decision-making matrix.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Andrew, I'm going to read you a sentence, and I want you to complete the sentence to the best of your ability, my friend, because
Okay.
I believe that in business, adversity in business is inevitable. But the remedy to sort of combat, adversity in business is sort of, the business resilience, because I believe that resilience is the answer to the test once adversity strikes. So the sentence is, adversity in business is inevitable, but the remedy to combat that would be what, in your opinion?
So the remedy to combat that is learning to love the climb. If you want to be at the top of a really tall mountain, you got to learn to love to climb. It's just part of the deal.
Well, fair enough, my friend. And to that point, I'm also curious to get your concept or definition of what it means to be a visionary founder in business and what that term visionary founder really means to you.
I use this term to talk about that group of people, men and women, who look out into the world or they look out into the market and they see a possible state of the world or state of the market that doesn't exist. They reach into that place we don't really have a name for, and they pull out of it some possibility for the world that's not there. And then they say, you know what? That's worth having in the world. I'm going to make that happen. I'm going to build a business that delivers that result into the market or into the world. And they organize their whole life around making that happen. That's what I mean by a visionary founder. It's someone who's out to fulfill this big vision they have for the kind of difference they and their business can make.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your view, Andrew, how can we build a business that leads to also a defining a fulfilling life, my friend? So how do you think we can strike the balance from business professionalism and building a business and really achieving personal prosperity? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by personal prosperity. If the only thing people mean by prosperity is financial wealth, then I think it becomes a very different thing. But if you look at prosperity, like prospering, as something that has to do with your whole self as a person, which includes your wealth, then I think the key thing about how you do this is it has to start with something that you find intrinsically meaningful. And I can't stress this enough. I spend a lot of time, as you may too, Kevin, on LinkedIn, publishing thought leadership and content for my target market for people to try to provide some value and build a brand for my business. And I spend a lot of time reading other people's content, and I get frustrated sometimes at how much content out there is focused 100% on success and 0% on fulfillment. Because success without fulfillment, I think, gives you an empty life. And so my cautionary tale, around this, and the answer to your question, Kevin, is you have to start with fulfillment. You have to start with what is intrinsically meaningful to you, not what is a means to some other end, like a financial windfall. What is worth spending your life on intrinsically that you could then use to build something that also generates wealth? I think that's the trick to prosperity in this life.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrew, my final question for you this afternoon has to do with life and legacy, my friend. Andrew, if I told you I was throwing you a lifetime achievement party, and I asked your family and closest friends to give a toast about your life and your legacy, my friend, how would you want them to define it, my friend?
I would want them to define my life and my legacy as the life of a man who connected people to who they really are and helped them connect to others in a meaningful way, and who discovered and used their power to make a real difference in life. And if people said that about me after I'm gone, and that was true of me in the world, I would be very satisfied with that.
Absolutely. Well, Andrew, I have to ask you first of all before we say goodbye to each other, everybody. If people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Well, on social, the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. So you can just go to LinkedIn/in/Andrew Poles. Easy to connect with me there. I'm there a lot. Or you can just email me directly at apoles, first initial last name, apoles@andrewpoles.com.
Well, fantastic. Well, as someone who spent probably an unhealthy amount of time on LinkedIn myself, my friend, I can certainly respect that, my friend. But I really want to thank you for your wisdom of leadership in the field of business acceleration and business growth. I think you're really a pioneer in the space, my friend, and it was a real privilege and honor to have the chance to interview you this afternoon. So I want to thank you for being here and for engaging in conversation with me this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Well, thank you for that. And Kevin, I really appreciate what you're doing with your time and with your life, and the conversation that you're having with the market about the importance of seeing people with disabilities and including them, and the time you put into giving people like me an audience or an opportunity to share our views and hopefully touch more people. So you're just doing great work, and I deeply appreciate you as a person and as a professional for doing it.